Federer, Novak Djokovic, Andy Murray and Serena Williams paid their tributes in a video presentation which moved Nadal and his family to tears. The Spaniard extended his career to an age few had thought possible given the severity of knee and foot injuries, and will be remembered for the physicality of his performances, winning 14 French Open titles and his enduring relationship with Federer. They contested one of the greatest sporting duels of all time in the Wimbledon final of 2008. He made Spain proud and the whole tennis world proud, was how Federer summed it up in a valedictory social media post.
BBC News.
Hello and welcome to Business Matters here with BBC World Service. I'm Robert Tony. On the programme today is climate change.
For us, it's a fight for survival. It's not about finding money to create shiny new projects. It's literally a fight for survival.
It's happening in one of the world's most famous fashion companies.
In its 100 or so year history, there really only been two chief creative directors who have defined Chanel as we know it today.
On the joint for the programme, two guests on the science journalist and analyst on the Let's hear a bit of him speaking at a recent Trump rally in New York.
When was America great? At the turn of the century, our economy was rocking. This is 1900, 25 years ago. We had no income tax. And all we had was tariffs. All
And it's touched a lot of that, but coming up for that couple of weeks. How significant an appointment is it?
I think it's really interesting because you look at how he worked with Lighthizer, the U.S. Trade Representative, to help U.S. companies access overseas markets and contend with international competition. So I think it's really interesting because he's a generous guy.
Well, tell our listeners that story.
And most people have a big chunk of their perished in a 9/11 attack. It was his son's first day in kindergarten, so he wasn't in the office. He paid a large portion of the profits, I remember 25% or something, to the families of the people who died for, I think, 10 years. So it's over $100 million that he paid out over to those families for the decade after 9/11. So, he's a finance guy. He's also very kind of so I think he's an interesting guy. He's definitely a Trump guy. And Trump guy. But he's a human being. He's how
He was deputy director of the National
potential outcomes. So I suspect that may be one of the reasons that he chose Mr. Lutnick as well.
And we have seen with a lot of Donald Trump's appointments, whether they've been in the sort of finance sector, the economy sector, the general sector, loyalty is a huge factor in those appointments. And Howard Lutnick has been extremely loyal.
Yeah, he has. And he's did a fantastic job during the campaign on behalf of the president, and really fought at a time when, many didn't believe the president could regain the presidency, and he did. And so I think that loyalty is something that's appreciated by the president, and demonstrates a willingness to continue to work with him to advance his agenda.
On this point of tariffs, there have been a lot of concerns. There's a lot of channels there at the G20 summit in Brazil. There's fear that the tariffs that may be imposed could put the world back on a path to higher inflation.
That has been expressed by some of their experts, but I think when you look at the broader agenda, it's not just tariffs, there's regulation, there's tax cuts coming in, and I think you need to look at the totality of the economic agenda. And I think the president understands, how damaging inflation can be, and it's going to, balance all those factors as he advances his agenda through the Congress and over the next term.
Interesting to hear from some of those two. Donald Trump. Let us bring a bit more. Pakistan relies heavily, doesn't it, on exports of textiles. We're getting worried with all this talk of tariffs.
I think people are not people are worried about the Pakistan. How the Trump president. And I cabinet makes a lot of things. What this tariff have impact that was it does have the SEO
Let us see what happens. I mean, a lot of people say it's not interestingly, we are getting reports now coming out of the US. We could see the Treasury Secretary being announced on Wednesday. What are you expecting to see?
Well, it really was an attitude to rise like that's starting to move it. It does a very well-acted trader there's
Just on a point here, can you, just for our listeners, Treasury Secretary, Commerce Secretary, they're very different in what they're getting here. The Treasury Secretary probably the bigger of the two positions.
Oh, absolutely. And even when you go to the White House, the Treasury building is literally right next to the office. So, definitely the Treasury is always extremely important to the executive. So the Treasury is they're managing the printing of bills and the debt and other things that the government is taking out and spending and other things. So counterfeiting and all sorts of things. So it's a very important position. They have to understand how to. I'll be careful here to say manipulate the value of the U.S. dollar in the U.S. interest. They have to be careful about how to manage the duration of Treasury, whether it's short-term debt or long-term debt. There are a lot of things they have to manage in the financial markets to be advantageous to the U.S. It's an incredibly important position.
Scott Bessent, his name.
Yes, Scott Bessent, yes.
And it looks likely that he's going to get it. But let's see, anything can happen in the world of politics.
Yes.
Yeah.
Just markets were doing really well when there was a lot of noise that Bessent was going to make it, and then there was gossip that Lutnick was going to be the Treasury Secretary, and there was worry in markets that Lutnick would make it because they wanted Bessent in markets. So Bessent worked for George Soros, and very well established. So I think it's a safe set of hands to take that role.
Certainly seems to be the top, but who knows? We'll return to that story
recently, I mean, Pakistani journalists and Pakistani friends were doing this just a few days ago that, now I'm seeing my Delhi friends doing. Because honestly, it's like a contest between the two cities, that who's going to be the most polluted city on a given day. I mean, this is not a contest that we should be having, right?
I think
Not
you're
a-
right about it.
Yeah, I agree. Both cities, and this is not just about Delhi and Lahore, it's actually about the entire region and the pollution as well. So the thing is that, we're literally living in gas chambers. We're literally tasting poison on our tongue. We can taste it, we can smell it, our eyes are burning because of it. I mean, in my home, we have like 4 or 5 air purifiers, and every month we are actually ordering 1 or 2 more, just so that we can control the air quality within our house. But this is a privilege. I mean, this is a luxury that we can afford. Not everybody can afford it, right? Most people actually cannot afford air purifiers. They're really expensive. So the thing is that at the end of the day, it is the government's responsibility, just the state's responsibility also, to actually work on this. And at the end of the day, and the climate financing, which you're going to discuss just now.
We are going to discuss it a little bit later in the program. Reminds me, we were talking about a lot about my own experiences when I lived in that taste on the tummy, something to get rid of when your eyes watering constantly, and you do struggle to breathe after a period of time. You do feel your body changing because of the pollution around you. But a lot of people have to work in those conditions in places like Lahore and Delhi. Let's hear from a rickshaw driver in Lahore.
We are compelled to go out because we have children. If we stay home, what will we do? We have to earn our livelihood. There is no other option. Not everyone is a job holder. We are laborers. We need to earn to labor here.
Many people having to do that. Raja Jahangir Anwar is the Environment Minister of Punjab.
Air quality index is beyond our control, and I must admit that it is actually a surprise for us. We were not ready to face such kind of surge in AQI. The whole of the government is actually working towards the mitigation of smog. We know that this is a long battle.
Rafi Alam is an environmental lawyer in Pakistan, in Lahore.
The overwhelming majority, about 45% of year-long air pollution in Punjab comes from automobile emissions, and the other 30 to 35% comes from emissions from energy and from industry.
That is where the emissions are coming from. They are steadily getting worse in cities like Lahore. Why is it getting worse when it seems that people know what the problem is? Why is no one dealing with it?
This is a problem that people feel occurs every winter. They blame it on crop fires. Then a couple of days later it rains or the winds blow. Everyone thanks God and they move on to the next year, failing to understand that this is a year-long air pollution problem that cumulatively comes to a head around about October, November. So really there's been a denial of the problem, which is one of the reasons why we have it. We've known for decades that air pollution in Pakistani cities has been below par. This is not a surprise.
As you say, it's clearly not a surprise. The problem is getting worse. We're seeing more people in hospital. It's having huge economic consequences. Have we reached a tipping point where you now think that the state government, the federal government in Pakistan will do more about this?
I hope so.
Do you think so? Because it's different hoping so and thinking so.
Well, no, I hope so now, because in the past, in the last 6-8 years, air pollution has been bad throughout the year. It gets worse during the winters, but it scarcely goes over 600, 800 AQI. And if it does for a couple of days. The last 2 weeks, over most of Punjab, has seen air quality index not just beyond 1,000, not just beyond 2,000. It's beyond 2,500. These are numbers that are unthinkable, and they will have consequences in the coming days.
Can you tell me what those consequences you think are going to be, or what you're beginning to see around you that you didn't see before?
Well, anecdotally, I have friends and colleagues and staff that can't come to work because they're sick. Do you know, by the way, just this January, during the last air pollution crisis, over 500 children died of pneumonia in Punjab, and that's with AQI less than 1,000. We have not even begun to hit the winter periods right now. I am dreading the consequences in terms of life, because we've seen AQI levels like we've never seen before.
is insane, isn't it, Memal? There's something, I mean, we should be having AQIs of 50 to 100, over 2,000. Are you seeing around you more pressure now coming in on the government to do something about this? Because it is becoming unlivable.
Well, you know, I completely agree with Rafid. This is not something that we had seen before. This is actually unbelievable. And yes, people are getting sick, falling ill. I know my friend's daughter, who's not been well for a young daughter. She's just 2 years old. She's not been well for the last 3 weeks, and she cannot step out of the house. And Rahul, at the end of the day, you know, and there have been studies which basically say that, you know, our lifespan is actually going to be like, it's going to affect us for like 5-7 years. They're decreased by that because of this pollution, because of this smog. And this is just criminal. And yes, there is a lot of pressure on the state, but as I was telling you that, you know, I was actually reading those tweets from my colleagues and friends in Delhi, and they say the same thing as people in Pakistan, that the government is not really doing enough and really not doing it on a war footing when it should be. I mean, if we need a pool upgrade, we need to do it. We need to start, you know, because the thing is that, you know, I was actually reading about this, and there's Yasir Hussain, the head of Climate Action Center. He said that, you know, I mean, motorcycles alone consume $50 million worth of petrol over the past 10 years. They got 69% of pollution caused by food consumption. So, you know, I mean, of course, as Rafid told you, one of the main issues, you know, that lead to this, it's not that October, November, it's just that we see it physically in a way.
The temperatures fall, don't it? So that's why it sticks around in the air. And then it's very difficult. I think if you haven't been there, if you haven't experienced it, it's so difficult to explain because it is something that people couldn't imagine. It's something like an old Victorian
I have to actually be here to know what it tastes like.
You taste
how
it.
your eyes are like red all the time, watering,
It's
insane.
It is, but it's not something you want people to actually go through. Tell me, do you think, and I remember when I was in Kolkata and then spent a lot of time in Delhi as well for work, that a lot of foreign, you know, companies, people who are working for them said, we don't want to live in Delhi because we just can't cope. It is going to put people off from working.
It will, yeah. So I lived in Singapore for a long, long time, and we used to have a thing called the haze that would come in August, September, when palm crops were being grown. And it was so smoky, we literally couldn't see across the street. So Emma was describing flying after I was inside this big square house, and you feel that creepy, skin crawly smoke on your skin all the time. It's really terrible, and I'm fortunate to be in a place where we don't have that now. But what you're saying about you know, people not wanting to live there because of this season is completely understandable, because some families had to leave when I was in Singapore because their kids couldn't handle because of their asthma and other you know, other issues. So, and for the people who can't leave, it's terrible and can be life-threatening.
Yeah, that is the problem. I know most people can't leave from Delhi and two of the world's biggest cities. The lucky can leave, but most people can't leave. Though I hope it's a story we can stop talking about. I fear that is not going to be the case. Could Google be forced to sell Chrome, the world's most popular web browser? That's what we're expecting the US Department of Justice to propose later on Wednesday after a judge ruled back in August that Google operates an online search monopoly. Let's speak to our tech reporter in San Francisco, Lily Jamali. Thanks as always, Lily, for joining us on the program. This is a hugely important case, isn't it?
It really is. And as you say, this is a case that stems from the U.S. Department of Justice allegation that Google has been operating an illegal monopoly in online search. And folks should know this is a case that was originally brought by the government during the first Trump administration. The Biden administration took it on and was able to secure a verdict this summer. And now we have gone from trying to prove that this is an illegal monopoly to phase 2, which is what to do about it. This is the remedies phase, and the consequences could be pretty dire for Google.
But we've still got a long way to go here, haven't we? Because Google can still appeal, and we probably won't get an outcome of this until next year. Is there any sense that this is being speeded up at the moment because we are going to have a change in legislation?
I have not gotten any indications to that effect. I mean, from what we can tell, things are chugging along as per usual, regardless of who is in the White House. This notion of having Google hive off some of its major products, including Chrome, is a really big deal, and Google is absolutely digging its heels in here. I think for now we're sort of all operating on this notion that things will continue. We're expecting this filing tomorrow. A lot of this reporting is coming from Bloomberg News and the Wall Street Journal, but when we lay eyes on that filing tomorrow, we'll have a better sense. And then when future President-elect Donald Trump takes office once again on January 20th, it will be up to his administration to decide where things go.
On the wider issue, Tony, of regulation, we are likely to see less regulation from the Trump administration than the Biden administration. That's the political difference, isn't it, between the Democrats and the Republicans. But on big tech, could it be a little bit more complicated?
And worry among Republicans about the concentration of power of technology companies. So I think we could see more action like this, where big tech companies at least are required to have more transparency around their business activities.
Let us see what happens. Lily, you're there in San Francisco. Donald Trump has spent the day again with Elon Musk, hasn't he, with the launch of that SpaceX rocket. While we have you with us, give us a sense of some of the conversations you're hearing around you in San Francisco about this bromance. It's probably the world's most important one.
It absolutely is. There's a lot of discussion around, I think there's, within a certain sector of tech, real relief that Trump was elected. A lot of tech money ended up being poured into this race. Compared to 2016, when people were much more publicly in support of the Democratic candidate, Hillary Clinton at the time, here we see a real reversal. I think a lot of that support for Donald Trump coming from this part of the world has to do with regulation. And Elon Musk also doesn't like regulation very much. He has a lot of money on the line in terms of getting rid of as much regulation as he can. So I think we'll see this bromance continue to bloom in the coming months, although there's some discussion about maybe they won't get along so well in a matter of weeks. Maybe they'll get sick of each other.
Let's who knows? Maybe that's not, maybe we're being unfair. Maybe it could be friends for life, both of them.
Friends for life,
Friends for life. Lily will let us know how that bromance is going on over the next few months. We'll be back with you after the news.
We'll be back with Business Matters in just a minute. In an hour, the climate question learns about climate aid.
This money helped me a lot. First, I bought household materials again, since I had lost everything. I also bought clothes and food. With the second installment, I bought sheets of iron and then started making bricks for building.
Outlook is at 3GMT.
Indigenous singer Luzmilla Carpio draws inspiration from the rhythms of the earth. As a young woman, she was forbidden from singing in her native Quechua and had to fight to be heard. Luzmilla's battle brought her culture and love of birds onto the global stage.
And then we enter a world of secrets as we continue our investigation, finding Mr. Fox.
Police in Brazil think they know who put more than a ton of cocaine on a boat sailing across the Atlantic. But has the mastermind slipped the net?
That's all coming up here on the BBC World Service.
You're listening to Business Matters here on the BBC World Service with me, Rahul Taylor. We've got Mehman in Pakistan, we've got Tony there in the US. We're going to be talking about climate finance. Do we need a complete reform of it? Are we likely to see that at COP? We're going to be talking about where do people get their news from nowadays. And Chanel, one of the world's great fashion empires, why doesn't it have a chief designer?
BBC News. The medical charity MSF says it will stop its operations in the Haitian capital Port-au-Prince because of threats from police. MSF, which works in the world's worst war zone, said it couldn't continue when law enforcement became a direct threat. It's one of the biggest providers of care in Haiti, where medical services have collapsed. Prosecutors in New York have backed delaying sentencing in Donald Trump's hush money case until after he completes his upcoming presidential term. Lawyers for the president-elect want his conviction overturned. Officials in the US say Russia intercepted 2 of the 8 American-supplied ballistic missiles used by Ukraine to strike Russian territory. Moscow said 5 missiles were shot down and that one had caused a fire at a military facility. Turkey's president says he blocked the Israeli president Isaac Herzog from using Turkish airspace to fly to the COP climate summit in Azerbaijan last week. Mr. Herzog ended up cancelling his visit. The wife of the Ugandan opposition figure, Kizza Besigye, has alleged that he's been kidnapped. Winnie Byanyima said he was last seen in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi, on Saturday. A court in El Salvador has ruled that a former president, Alfredo Cristiani, must stand trial for his alleged role in several notorious killings. SpaceX's Starship giant rocket has launched on another test flight from Texas. Half of the Starship came down in the Gulf of Mexico and the rest in the Indian Ocean. The Spanish tennis player Rafael Nadal has ended the Minnesota Davis Cup. The 22-time Grand Slam winner lost in the first singles match of the tournament. ABC News.
Welcome back to Business Matters here on the so let's go and check in with COP in a minute. Of course, that's continuing. We'll end later. It's crucial when it comes to the issue of climate finance. But now, I wanted to ask you a question because we were discussing it earlier. Before we had the program, we were discussing going out and talking about Pakistan on market that we were talking about the networks. And I know this is a discussion in India. Whenever we talk on difficult aspects of difficulties in the economy, difficulties when it comes to smog, we're going to be talking about climate finance as well. I know in India people used to get quite annoyed about the way they felt their country was portrayed in a negative way. Is that similar in Pakistan? People often get upset about the way that it is covered.
But you know, sometimes yes, but sometimes it's just anger one way. Because it's tilted, it's just bad. So good news really doesn't make it out there as just bad news. Because, you know, I mean, in our industry, Rahul, you know that, you know, bad news is news, more newsy. So yes, there is a problem, and sometimes the government also complains about that. But at the end of the day, a lot of people also question the government that, you know, if there are enough positive things happening, only then, and this is not just about international news, this is about local news as well. That, you know, sometimes the state says that, you know, there's not enough positive news coverage on news channels or in newspapers, but that means that when there should be something positive to report on. And when there is, and we do report it in the local news channels or in the industry. But it is the image conscious thing is, you know, yes, a problem with a lot of countries.
Yeah, it is a problem for a lot of countries. But I suppose, beyond its thing, we're going to talk about the news quite a lot in the second half of the program here now. Says Memo says that generally bad news sells more than good news. And people will say that media organisations, and certainly there is a question to be answered there, but you know, the public seems to prefer that as well. So.
Yeah, it's, you know, it gets clicks, elections and bad news, right? And if it bleeds, it leads, you know, those sorts of things. So, you know, yeah, I think, you know, when my family lived in Asia, we would come back to the U.S. and when we watched the news in Asia, it was news, it was events, it was stuff that happened. When we came back to the U.S. for 15 years, we noticed that all of the news was scary and it was about bad things that were going to happen. And so, you know, but then when we went back to Asia, it was less about scary stuff. So, you know, I think people around the world think that the U.S. is this scary place where you're going to get shot and, you know, murdered and all this other stuff. And, but it's a reflection of what's in the news here. And I don't know any murderers. I know that sounds like a really silly thing to say, but, you know, if you would base it on our visits back here, So I don't think it's just, say, an India or Pakistan issue. I think internally in the U.S., well, maybe externally there is a positive or negative view. I don't know anymore. But internally in the U.S., I think there's a lot of scaremongering in news, and it's to get clicks and to get visits and to sell commercials.
Yeah, I'm going to pick up on that issue a little bit later.
I wanted to have that discussion because it was something that we have been talking about. I really wanted to get your views on it. Let us turn to COP now. Those UN climate negotiations, of course, in Baku in Azerbaijan, are continuing. At the center of it is how will the world fund climate finance? It's really the central issue of this particular conference. We wanted to look at a country that needs money because of the impact of climate change, which it's already suffered. And we have Memar with us, so we thought let's look at Pakistan. Those floods in Pakistan in 2022. And these comments from the UN Secretary General at the time, Antonio Guterres, when he visited the country.
I've seen many humanitarian disasters in the world, but I have never seen climate carnage on this scale. I have simply no words to describe what I've seen today. A flooded area that is 3 times the total area of my own country, Portugal.
Really is. Talk to Memar about it in a minute. Sherry Rahman was Pakistan's climate change minister at the time. She's been at this COP as well. She believes that the current climate finance system, well, it simply doesn't work.
The slogans are getting smarter and sharper, deliver action now, but frankly, if you look at the ground, the funds have neither been. Are we seeing the kind of political will needed to take it forward, to bridge the gap? For us, it's a fight for survival. It's not about finding money to create shiny new projects. It's literally a fight for survival of the ground.
We like to talk about numbers on this program. Pakistan's still recovering from those huge floods in 2022. So how much money do you need still to rebuild the country or parts of the country?
Right after the floods, we immediately identified just the loss and damage from that flood. That was catastrophic at $30 billion, and that shaved off 8% of our GDP. The amounts needed are staggering compared to what's on offer, and frankly, really very little is on offer.
I think that's really interesting because it gets to the crux of the problem. So let's go back to how much money you have actually received, because there were lots of promises. Did you get all that money?
I'm sorry, Pakistan's funding is well under, in terms of Geneva pledges that we mobilized after the flooding. Again, some has come in, some has not, which has disappeared. We need another mechanism called the International Determined Contributions. IDC should measure the landscape of climate financing.
Many countries like Pakistan need more money, but who's going to provide it? We don't seem any closer to an answer.
You're quite right in asking where's the money going to come from. I am saying provide first a mechanism to be able to provide confidence to developing countries that this whole system is actually working, that we're going to COPs to negotiate something that it will be credible and will be delivered in the kind of time and scale we need. Secondly, you're speaking about where's the money going to come from. Well, 77% of emissions are generated at the G20. Right now, the money is very much in the system. You're giving $7 trillion worth of subsidies to oil and gas, so it's not like there's no money. Another level of capital is needed. The current system will not deliver, and we're encouraged to stay within that system.
About Sherry Rahman, eloquent as always. But the fact is, Pakistan may need this money, and it may need it in firm terms of grants rather than loans, but it's unlikely to come from the US under a Trump administration. And also China will secondly is committed. Well, it doesn't seem to want to contribute very much either, because it says historically it's not part of the problem. So the same question I put to Sherry Rahman, because I can't see the answer to it. Where's the money coming from?
I mean, that's the thing, Rahul. I mean, even we saw, a lot of talk at COP29. We also saw a lot of talk even at G20. But, where is the commitment? Where are the commitments? So, I was reading this very good piece by Memar Ahmed in Pakistan today, where she's given a very good analogy that the climate finance ecosystem, what's happening there. So basically, it's like she wrote that imagine your neighbors polluting your garden with toxic waste, killing all your plants, contaminating your water source. Instead of helping to clean it up, they offer to sell you expensive bottled water and costly special seeds that can grow in poor soil. Now, not only are you paying to survive in the environment they ruin, but you're also contributing to their profits as you buy more and more of what they sell to make up for the damage they cause. So that's the thing. Basically, these countries mostly have given us loans and not grants. And grants, Sharif Rahman just told you how much loss we suffered just the 2022 flood. And it's not flood only. We've had extreme heat waves, and now the smog season is there. So we're talking about smog, but pollution is there. So we are one of the most vulnerable countries when it comes to climate change, and we don't emit so much gases, and we're not the contributors to global climate change issue. But the thing is that at the end of the day, we are on the receiving end. We are facing the consequences of what countries like US and others have done to the globe, to the world. And yes, it is worrying that yes.
Yeah. No. I think you've made the point very eloquent. But I just wanted to get Tony's thoughts on whether this sort of system is actually going to work this time, because it isn't working at the moment, isn't it? We're not seeing the sort of more developed economies or high-income economies, if we want to use that term, helping some of the lower-income economies. And will we see it helping?
Well, I think this is something that was feasible when we had zero interest and negative interest rate policy in Western countries, but we don't have that anymore. And so, and I'm sorry to call it a luxury, but the luxury of climate finance and the luxury of financing kind of the green future is just a very financially difficult prospect for Western countries right now. So when we come to a point where we have zero and negative interest rate policy again, and we have growing economies with those interest rate environments, I think then it's possible that something happens. And I hate to be very direct about it, but I think this is something that after the financial crisis in 2008 and 9, we had a boom in green technologies and climate finance. And it was because largely of zero interest and negative interest rate policy. And we just don't have that anymore.
It is certainly a discussion, isn't it? Because I think a lot of people get frustrated with COP that we don't see progress on it, but that could be one of the reasons why we've seen that. It's a discussion that we will continue on Business Foundation because COP continues. Now, the satirical news publication, The Onion, of course, we remember this story, called InfoWars, the media organization headed by the right-wing conspiracy theorist Alex Jones for an undisclosed price at a court auction. There's now a bit of confusion about this because a company affiliated with Alex Jones has asked the federal judge to basically disqualify that bid. It's a complicated reason that's been put forward. Let's see what the courts decide to rule on that. But this was a story that caught our attention last week. We wanted to hear from somebody who's been close to The Onion about it. So Tim Keck is an American newspaper publisher. You founded it.
First of all, it's a great decision, and obviously by the reaction people have gotten, it's probably the most reaction to an Onion story I've ever seen. That represents a PR win for it. The world of conspiracy and the world of humor have similarities. First of all, they're frequently both not telling things that aren't factually accurate, but they also kind of work in the same way in people's minds. They have this sense of belonging, right? If you're in on the joke, you're in on something, or if you're in on the conspiracy, you're in on it. People have loved The Onion partially because some people don't know that it's a joke. And so that gives them this sense, whether true or not, that they have this sense of like being a little bit above the people who don't get the joke. And of course, it also just represents that this is just like the blending of the real and unreal and joke and not a joke. And it's very difficult to tell the difference. And so I think it's very timely in that sense.
It is very timely, isn't it? And you raise a really interesting point there about when you set up The Onion with the sort of satire you were trying to do that often took it into the realms of whether stories were true or not, has become a much wider debate about mainstream media. Social media is part of that now, isn't it?
Yeah, that's exactly right. When we first started The Onion, what people thought of news was this thing that was like kind of the AP style book of news, and that they trusted their local paper, and they watched Dan Rather at night, and they had this sense, and there was very few sources, and when people read The Onion, they understood the parody. They understood the structure, the tropes of how a newspaper works. Now, with things so broken apart in so many different ways, and so many different types of media, it's, I think, harder for The Onion to break through because people don't know what that source is. They don't understand the mechanisms of, let's say, a daily newspaper.
You were still involved in the media, and you sold The Onion quite early on. You were involved in founding it, and then moved on to other things. What are you doing now, and what are the sort of challenges that you see in that space at a time where getting people to pay for content is challenging?
Yeah, it's interesting. Well, so I started the Stranger in Seattle, and also the Portland Mercury. But actually this year I recently sold both of those publications to a company called Noisy Creek, which I'm on the board of. So I'm still involved in that universe. And like The Onion, from our perspective, doing The Stranger at the Portland Mercury, print is coming back. The Onion recently announced that they're going back to print. Our publications as well have been going back to print. And
why do you think it's coming back?
I think it's something tangible. I think for both advertisers and readers, having a thing gives it something, gives it some more oomph. And I think that was lost for a long time. And readers, and surprisingly young readers, have been very attracted to going back to print.
Do you see that as a trend much wider in the US? Do you see local papers coming back and doing well again? Because many of them are struggling and disappearing, aren't they?
Yeah, I haven't seen a lot of other examples of it, but I think it's early. And I also think there's kind of this analog sense. Records have been coming back for a long time, and that continues to be the case. And I think there is this kind of drift to a little bit more analog, like I said, a little more tangible, something that you can actually trust. And then as far as like having false information or false sites, all that kind of, I think the work that goes into actually having a publication makes the content feel a bit more real.
Interesting to hear the views of the UK. Are you seeing much of that around you, telling people going back to the tangible, or is it much more the intangible that they're using?
I don't see much move to the tangible. I mean, it would be cool if we see it, but I just don't see much move to it.
Memo, like in India, people, newspapers still fairly strong, beginning to decline maybe a little bit now in Pakistan. You've got some great newspapers there. Do you see a lot of people when you're wandering around, if you can see through the smoke, reading newspapers?
Well, a lot of people have now to reading newspapers online. So, physically buying newspapers has declined, the numbers have gone down. So that is, of course, a problem, and paper has become more expensive, I mean, when newspapers, the media owners, they buy the papers, that's really, really expensive. So it's becoming very difficult for newspapers in that way, but thankfully they're surviving because they've also, they have their digital media as well, and so people have shifted down, so they get into digital advertising also. So that's one way of looking at it. I mean, it is, we're actually transitioning, or we're evolving the entire news media industry, especially with digital media. You can experiment with a lot of stuff. There's so much new stuff that you have to understand what your audience is, what to do.
We do, and it is confusing at times, isn't it? But we're going to focus on that a little bit now, and listen to this.
Watch this guy, Pac-Man. He's good. Pac-Man. He's Pac-Man.
Over the last week, there has been a ton of...
That is David Pakman. He's the host of the David Pakman Show. We're going to talk to him now because we're seeing that shift in news that Memar was talking about. It is quite a big shift away from anchors and articles to influences on social media. David Pakman is one of them, and he's the author of the forthcoming book, The Echo Machine. David, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.
Tell us a little bit about where people can watch your content. Where is it?
It's honestly in too many places. We need to cut down some. It's too easy to find it. YouTube, audio podcast, and TikTok are probably our three largest platforms right now.
And as quite a personal question, I suppose, as somebody who's doing this, does it work well for you financially?
It works very well, yeah. And here's one of the things. A lot of this is timing and showing up for 10 years and continuing to do it. And I was fortunate in that I
started on some of these platforms as they were starting to really be places for political discussion. So I had the benefit of timing and then really just sticking with it. And they can be great businesses, and I still don't have a boss, so that's great.
You don't. You are the boss, aren't you?
Well, in a sense, it's the audience, right? But I think one of the things that's very appealing is there's no one person who can say, I didn't like what you said, the show is over. I might anger 1,000 people in my audience, and they could say, I'll never watch or listen again, or I'll cancel my paid subscription. And of course, that's kind of the way it works. But there's at least no one gatekeeper, and I think that's what makes it very appealing.
Let's bring in Gregory Galant, co-founder and CEO of Muckraker Platform, enabling PR teams to work together to find the right journalists for their stories. And I suppose increasingly you're looking at more outlets like David's, aren't you?
100%. We started Muckrack 15 years ago, and back then the world of journalists was pretty limited. Ironically, then journalists were trying to become more like influencers. That was when journalists were starting to get on what was then Twitter, now X and Instagram and other social platforms. And now the influencers are becoming more like journalists.
Gregory, we talk a lot, don't we, about people maybe not wanting to pay so much for content. Is that true? Do we have the same pot of money, but it's actually just being spread out much further?
Yeah, I think there's a whole new kind of attention economy going on where, I mean, for a long time, people haven't really paid for the full value of content. Like if you bought a copy of the newspaper, that newspaper made a fraction of their revenue from selling that paper. They made most of the money from ads in it. And now, you know, this attention's flooded online, and you have the ad dollars, not only from what used to go into traditional news like newspapers and television, but in billboards and money that would have otherwise gone into entertainment.
So, I mean, where do you get most of your news content from? And do you see your kids and others around you getting it from very different sources?
I get most of my news content from Twitter or X. I follow a variety of people on the political spectrum and media outlets, and I've done that for years. That's been my primary source. My kids get it from different, they'll get it from TikTok, or they'll get it from other sources. So there is definitely, I think, a generational approach to news gathering.
There is Memal. I know you're going to say the BBC, we'll take that for granted. But where else are you getting your news from?
So the thing is that, you know, I mean, I get it from X and also from 3 p.m. or 6 p.m. or 9 p.m. bulletin on news channels. So there's that. But the thing is that, you know, I mean, I started from the newspaper industry. I started my career from a newspaper, but then I went into the electronic media, and from there I transitioned to digital media. So I mean, I come on TV as an analyst as well, but the thing is that, you know, digital has taken over. So yes, we are evolving. There's this credibility issue also. There's also the fact-checking issue, like, you know, whether it's the news on digital or social media platforms is factual or not, fake news or not. There are a lot of challenges, but yes, the media is evolving.
David, you look at you're an Argentine American talk show host, so business is going to be great for you moving forward, isn't it? Because it's an interesting time in both countries. But some of the figures that we're seeing, it shows us how important a moment this is in media consumption. Now, 1 in 5 Americans rely on people like you for their news.
That's true, and one of the interesting things about the Pew Research Center's study about this found that only TikTok has what we might call left-wingers or progressives exceeding right-wing voices, and by a very small margin, something like 28 to 25. All the other platforms, and increasingly Twitter, or X as it's now known, are very much dominated by right-wing voices. And so one of the interesting things is that on the one hand, a lot of these platforms have really democratized this entire space. On the other hand, they've also been, in a sense, increasingly pushed to one side politically, and that there's, depending on one's political perspective, as far as I'm concerned, I find that to be a negative.
It does indeed. Well, look, thank you so much for joining us. We're going to check it out on the way home. Actually, look forward to hearing what you have to say about lots of different issues. Greg, where is the shift coming in terms of where you're placing stuff? Where is it mainly going for you now?
Yeah, Yeah, we're seeing a big shift in terms of where the content is. So it's been for a while that the biggest thing getting shared on is social networks. It's news. I think one thing that's changing is it used to be you'd go on a social network and you'd see links maybe from an untraditional source, but to a traditional news outlet. You'd see a link to the BBC, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and now a lot of the content itself is just happening on the social network, to your text post itself, YouTube video, etc. So it's kind of getting more confusing for companies and influencers to know who to talk to and control the message.
Well, it is indeed. Thank you so much for joining us. We will continue to look at that. Let's end by talking about one of the great fashion companies of the world, Chanel. Doesn't have an artistic director. Why not? Here's Pauline Brown, former head of LVMH North America.
Well, it's very unlikely for a fashion house that should be thriving, that is, a top 5 in the world. It's very unusual that it would go for this period of time, very unusual that there wouldn't be more of a succession plan in place, particularly as you think about the tenure of Karl Lagerfeld, almost 4 decades. And then by the time he passed, there was a bit of a scramble to get his replacement. So I see this as rather sloppy in its management process.
Why has it been so sloppy? Are they struggling to find the right person? Do the people they want not want to come to them?
I think anybody they tapped in the wide world of fashion would be hard-pressed to say no to this one. So it's not for lack of interest and demand for the role. I think it's coming down to a couple of issues. One, perfectionism is the enemy of the good, and this is one where they just do not want to make a mistake, particularly on the heels of a designer who had a mixed track record.